beneath the crimson sands of Theros, a forgotten moon orbiting a dead gas giant. The excavation site buzzed with activity. Teams of scientists and engineers, both alien and human, had worked for weeks, clearing layers of rock and dust, uncovering what appeared to be an ancient structure. At first, they thought it was a ruin, maybe a lost city or a decayed station, but as more of its sleek, black surface was revealed, curved like a blade, cold to the touch, unscathed by time, they realized they had found something far more unusual. It was massive, at least 2 kilometers long, buried nose down into the rock like a spear thrown from the stars. No one knew what it was or who had built it, but its presence was undeniable and strange. No records from any galactic database mentioned it, and its alloy did not match any known material. The leading alien scientists from the Tharn Collective tried every scan, every probe, every energy pulse, but the structure stayed silent, dead, inert. They grew frustrated, whispering among themselves that it must be a relic of a lost war or a monument to a civilization long gone. Lena Mirek, a junior human linguist assigned to catalog minor glyphs, mostly stayed in the background, unimportant, unnoticed. She had come for the experience, for the chance to be part of something historic, even if her job was nothing more than translating fragments of forgotten symbols. On the 16th day of the dig, she was walking along the hull, brushing away loose sand near a strange circular panel, when something odd happened. The air vibrated slightly, and a faint humming started under her fingertips. Before she could call for help, the circular panel lit up with a deep blue glow and retracted inward, revealing a glowing control node embedded in the wall. Everyone nearby froze. Tools dropped. Eyes turned to her. Lena looked around, confused, but before anyone could stop her, she reached out, just barely in, touched the glowing surface. In an instant, the entire world seemed to shift. The sky darkened as power surged through the buried structure. Lights traced along its hull, like veins waking after a long sleep. The ground trembled. Dust rose in plumes. Ancient systems powered on with a deep, echoing hum that rolled across the canyon like thunder. Screens came alive inside the command. Tents, displaying code none could read. Drones shut down. Power tools sparked and died. Then a voice, clear and ancient, echoed through every communicator, every headset. Every open channel, command authority recognized. Awaiting instructions, Commander. Silence followed. The voice was smooth, artificial, but filled with presence, as if a mind far older than any present had just stirred. The aliens panicked. The Tharn scientists shouted in alarm, accusing Alina of sabotage or triggering a weapon. But Alina stood frozen, staring at her hand. The panel was still glowing beneath her touch, pulsing like a heartbeat. The structure, no, it was a ship, was no longer silent. It was waking up. She tried to back away, but the panel followed her. Movement, responding to her like it was bonded to her alone. Attempts to approach her failed. Any alien who stepped too close found themselves stopped by invisible force fields that shimmered like heat waves. Only Alina could enter the chamber. That opened next, a tall, narrow corridor that descended deep into the ship's core. The entrance sealed shut the moment she passed through, locking the others out. Inside, the temperature was cool, the air breathable, though Alina didn't understand how. Lights flickered on as she moved, guiding her down halls lined with strange, shifting walls that seemed to breathe. The ship spoke to her, again not aloud this time, but inside her thoughts, a whisper that felt like memory. It showed her stars she had never seen, battlefields from ages ago, fleets torn apart by weapons that bent space. She stumbled forward, trying to understand what was happening, heart racing. She wasn't special, she thought. She was just a linguist. She had no military training, no history of greatness. Why was this ship responding to her? What did it see in her that no one else had? Outside, chaos grew. Commanders argued. The Tharn Collective demanded the ship be shut down or destroyed. Rumors spread across the expedition that the humans had planted the ship there, some kind of ancient trap or secret weapon, but none of them could access it. Only Alina did, as if responding to their growing threats. The ship's defenses activated. The dust storm around the site cleared with a single pulse of energy. Shield walls of golden light rose over the hull. A warning tone rang out across the moon's surface. And again, the ship's voice spoke louder this time, and with finality. Hostile movement detected. External forces approaching. Activating shields. In orbit, the expedition's ships flickered with alarms. Something massive had just scanned them all. Deep scans, penetrating every layer, assessing weapons and crew. And still, the ship waited for Yelena's word. She stood inside its core chamber now, looking at a central command throne shaped like no seat she had ever seen, but which adjusted itself as she approached. Her hand trembled as she reached out again, uncertain, afraid. She could feel it, watching her, not with eyes, but with systems far more advanced, measuring her thoughts, her intent, her fear. The whisper returned. "Do you accept command?" She didn't know what to say. She wasn't ready. But outside, she could already hear the muffled sound of weapons arming, of panic spreading through the ranks. She had found something ancient, something powerful, something dangerous, and now it was alive. All because of her. The silence inside the ancient warship was thick and strange. Like the air itself held its breath, watching Alina Mirek as she stepped deeper into the heart of the machine that had just named her its commander. She moved slowly, her footsteps echoing against the smooth, dark floor, guided by pulsing lights that danced along the walls, shifting between soft blue and silver. The corridor she entered curved like the inside of a shell, smooth and seamless. With no doors or seams yet, it seemed to know exactly where she wanted to go. Her hand hovered near the wall, and at her slightest movement, the floor panels reshaped themselves, guiding her toward a central chamber. It felt alive, not like a ship made of metal and wires, but like something with thought and memory. When she paused, the lights dimmed. When she stepped forward again, they lit up brighter, like a path welcoming her home. Inside the chamber, a massive structure floated in the air, a glowing core surrounded by rings of light and orbiting crystals. As she approached, the air around it shimmered, and a projection burst into life. Hi. It was a figure, humanoid but not human, tall and armored, in silver and black, with no visible face beneath its helmet. The voice that followed was deep, emotionless, and yet strangely calm. Command link confirmed. Preparing neural synchronization. Alina opened her mouth to protest, to ask what that meant, but the world flashed white before she could speak. In a heartbeat, she was no longer in the chamber. She was somewhere else entirely. Stars stretched before her in fleets of ships, some elegant, some brutal, moved in tight formations. She saw battles unfold in moments, ships exploding in bursts of fire and light, debris drifting in the void. Then she was aboard the warship again, but the ship was new, clean, and filled with crew beings of many forms, all working with purpose and precision. She saw the armored figure from earlier, standing at the command center, issuing orders in a language she didn't understand, yet somehow felt familiar. She wasn't just watching. She felt everything: panic, determination, pain. It was not her memory, but the ship's. The Judicator's soul was not just a machine. It remembered. It had fought, lost, and waited. The memories faded just as quickly, and Alina stumbled back as the projection disappeared, replaced by silence once more. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had felt the death of thousands. She had heard cries in languages lost to time. This ship had been part of something vast, something forgotten by the galaxy. Now it was awake again. It had chosen her. Why her? What made her different from the others? She was no soldier, no leader. She had studied languages, not weapons. And yet the ship treated her like the return of something long lost. Outside, the camp had descended into confusion and anger. The Tharn scientists were locked out completely, unable to even touch the ship's hull without triggering shock pulses. Their leaders argued in their command tents, broadcasting demands through short-range signals, insisting Alina surrender control of the ship to their specialists. Human members of the expedition were divided. Some demanded answers. Others feared what Alina had activated. The moon itself trembled slightly as the judicator systems continued powering up. Shield towers rose from the sand, forming a protective dome around the central section of the ship, glowing with golden energy. Orbiting satellites, once inert, began to pulse with new signals, encrypted messages in an unknown language, repeating the same phrase over and over. Alina asked the ship to translate, and it did. Warning. 4 signals detected. Probability of contact, 72%. Initiate defense protocols. Alina didn't know what the Vor were, but the word sent a chill down her spine. The ship's memory pulsed again, and more visions hit her, this time of shapes that weren't ships, but monsters made of metal and dark light, tearing through star systems like storms. The Vor ascendancy, an enemy that had consumed everything it touched. They had no faces, no voices, no fear. The Judicator had fought them long ago and had nearly fallen in its final stand. That battle had been the last recorded memory before the ship went dark, buried under the sands of Theros for 12,000 years. Alina realized, now this wasn't just a warship. It was a warning, a last line of defense that had gone silent because there was no one left to command it. Till now, she looked at her reflection in the smooth black walls and didn't recognize herself. Her eyes had changed only slightly, but enough. They shimmered faintly with the same light she saw in the ship's systems. She was changing, whether from the neural sync or the ship's influence, she couldn't say. But she wasn't just Alina Mirik anymore. She was something more, something the ship needed her to be. It didn't want a pilot, it wanted a leader, a commander. The pressure was unbearable, yet she felt a strange calm inside the storm of thoughts. The ship trusted her, and in a way, it felt like it had been waiting for her. She asked the Judicator why it chose her. The reply came in a whisper. Genetic key matched. Last seed, bloodline confirmed. Command protocol reinstated. Last seed. What did that mean? Was it possible that humanity had a deeper origin than anyone knew? That they were part of something older? Questions piled up, but there was no time for answers. Outside, ships arrived in orbit's mall at first. Shuttles carrying diplomats and armed teams from rival factions, all demanding access to the Judicator. When denied, some began powering weapons. The ship scanned them all and reported to Alina. In cold, efficient terms, threat levels, weapon strengths, weaknesses. She sat in the command seat now, the room responding to her every movement. The systems had accepted her completely. Still, she didn't want war. She opened communications, using the ship's systems to speak to the orbiting ships. Her voice carried clear across the moon's surface and beyond. This ship is under my protection, she said. Any act of aggression will be answered. Stand down, and we can talk. There was silence at first. Then a dozen voices spoke at once, some angry, some curious, some fearful. Tharn demanded she hand over the ship. Others accused Earth of plotting some ancient return to power. But one voice among them whispered what many feared. If the Vor are returning, then that ship may be our only chance. Alina ended the transmission. She turned to the adjudicator and asked again about the voice signals. This time, the answer was clear. 2 signals within range. Cloaked scouts moving toward Theros. The Vor were not just coming. They were already here. Alina felt her chest tighten. The ghosts in the metal were not just memories, okay? And now, with the adjudicator awake and its last commander chosen, okay? The galaxy would soon remember a war it had tried to forget. Alina sat motionless in the command seat of the adjudicator's soul as soft pulses of blue light ran across the walls and floor like rivers of energy, flowing to and from the ship's glowing core. And though her body was still, her mind was far away, pulled deep into the warship's memory by a connection she could not break nor fully understand. And within that memory, she saw stars spinning, entire galaxies burning, in a war that stretched across the ages, fought not with pride or honor, but with desperation and fear. And in that war, the adjudicator had not been alone. It had been part of a fleet, vast and terrible, forged by a forgotten alliance of ancient species. And among those commanders, one stood out, a human figure, wearing armor not unlike her own reflection in the blackened glass of the command chamber. And adjudicator called that figure Prime Commander Kale. And Alina saw that face clearly. Eyes sharp and bright, skin weathered by battle, voice steady and calm. And then she saw his death torn from the command seat by an explosion, flames licking the metal walls, while the ship screamed through space, alone, wounded, hunted, and finally crashing into the surface of Theros, where it buried itself to wait for another. Someone with Kale's blood, someone the ship could trust. And Alina gasped as the vision ended, blinking against a rush of knowledge. Her heart racing, sweat on her forehead, and even though it felt like hours had passed, only seconds had gone by, and the ship's voice returned softly in her mind, speaking without sound. You carry his line. And now his duty. And she didn't know how to respond, didn't know if she could carry such a weight. But the ship did not question her. It only served, waiting for her decision. And outside, the sky above Theros darkened again, as if a storm was gathering in space itself. Though there were no clouds on this dead moon, only sensors screaming in alarm, alerting her to the presence of cloaked Vor scouts that moved like shadows beyond the stars, invisible to the others, but not to the adjudicator, whose ancient systems pierced their veil like a blade, revealing 2 small ships circling above, their paths careful and quiet, as if testing the warship's awareness. And when Alina marked their presence, she felt something shift in the ship's core, a hunger, not for revenge, but for justice long denied. And she whispered, "Are they here for me?" And the adjudicator replied, "They come for the memory." And that answer chilled her more than any threat, because it meant the Vor knew the adjudicator had awakened, and they feared what it remembered, and perhaps feared her, too. And as she stared at the flickering display that showed the Vor vessels, she asked the ship to show her more, to teach her what these creatures were. And again the adjudicator obeyed, unlocking a section of its deep archive, filled with data once locked to all but the highest commanders. And within those files, Alina saw the first contact, not a meeting, but an invasion, when the Vor rose from a dead star, a species not of flesh but of technology twisted by time, feeding on energy, thought, and memory, stealing knowledge from every race they conquered, and worse still, turning their enemies into more Vor, not with machines, but by consuming their minds and rebuilding them in silence. And in that war, species vanished, not because they died, but because they were rewritten, absorbed into the endless hunger of the Vor ascendancy. And suddenly, Alina understood why the adjudicator had buried itself, because it had seen the final defeat of its fleet, seen the stars fall silent, seen no path forward, and had chosen instead to sleep, to wait for the one chance that remained. A hope placed in a single bloodline. And now, With the Vor back, that hope stood once again, and Alina felt it burning in her chest like fire, a mix of fear, duty, and something else, rage, not her own, but the ship's. Shared through their link, a cry from the past that echoed into the present. And as she leaned forward in the seat, her fingers brushed a panel that rose from the armrest, displaying a command prompt blinking steadily, and the ship asked, "Shall we engage?" And she hesitated, knowing that if she said yes, she would be starting a war no one else believed had begun. But if she said no, she would be giving the Vor time to strike first. And so she whispered, "Track only," and the ship pulsed in agreement, sending invisible probes through the void, weaving a net of light around the scouts, and within moments, it painted a perfect map of their movements, each one careful and precise. And yet, Alina noticed something. The Vor were not scanning the Judicator. They were scanning the moon itself. And when she told the ship to analyze their focus, it replied, with a word she didn't expect, "Vault." And from deep beneath the ship, an alert chimed, revealing that the Judicator's presence had reawakened another system, a storage facility buried far below, hidden even from the main expedition. And in that vault, something pulsed faintly, older even than the ship itself, and the ship's voice now carried tension. Secondary asset active, and Alina stood, her body moving on instinct, and as the walls opened to guide her down new halls, she followed, deeper than before, through layers of the ship not yet touched by dust or decay, where the air smelled of ozone and power. And finally she reached a great sealed chamber, its door covered in symbols too old for words, and with a thought, the Judicator opened it, revealing a massive crystal sphere hovering in a magnetic field, filled with swirling lights like trapped stars. And the ship said, "This is the seed core," and showed her its purpose to preserve knowledge, not just of the ship, but of the civilizations it once served, the languages, the songs, the dreams. And this was what the Vor had come for, not the ship, not her, but the memory itself, the record of all that came before, which they would drain and erase, just as they had done to countless others. And now Alina knew the truth. She wasn't just the ship's new commander. She was its guardian, and the protector of all that had been forgotten. And as the Vor scouts moved closer, she returned to the command chamber, her voice steady for the first time since this began, and said clearly, "Prepare to defend." And with that, the Judicator soul began to awaken fully, its weapon systems unlocking, its engines humming with stored power, and the stars above Theros shivered as something ancient and powerful opened its eyes once more, ready to fight for the memory of a fallen galaxy. The surface of Theros trembled beneath the growing power of the Judicator soul as its ancient systems continued to awaken, each pulse of energy sending low rumbles through the sands, while high above, the two Vor scout ships drifted into position, silent and cloaked, but no longer hidden from the ship's sharpened sensors. And as Alina stood in the command chamber, watching the tactical display ripple with red markers, she felt the weight of what was about to begin press hard against her chest. But there was no turning back now, because the Vor had already signaled others, and more ships were on their way. Not scouts, but warcraft, each one shaped like a blade of black glass, moving through space like shadows. And the Judicator's voice, still calm but now edged with urgency, whispered, "Enemy reinforcements. Inbound arrival in 22 minutes and outside the command dome." The expedition camp below had gone still. The human and Tharan scientists and guards looking up at the sky, where strange ripples of dark light shimmered like cracks in the stars. And then the first attack came without sound, without warning, as a blast of dark matter energy sliced through the atmosphere and struck one of the Tharan's orbiting transports, cutting it cleanly in half, its burning remains falling in streaks across the sky, and screams rose over open comms. panic spreading fast as alarms blared from every human and alien post on the moon. And Alina, now seated once again in the Judicator's command chair, gave her first true order shields to full defense grid active, and across the ship's vast structure, blue energy shields flared to life, overlapping in rings of light that wrapped around the warship like armor, while towers emerged from beneath the sands, unfolding like metal flowers, revealing turrets and emitter nodes. And for the first time in thousands of years, the Judicator soul stood ready for war, and, even as enemy ships began to uncloak above, circling like vultures, Alina's voice remained steady, boosted through external channels, warning the remaining camps on the surface to take cover or retreat. But it was already too late for many, because the Vor had no interest in prisoners or survivors, only in destroying anything that stood between them and the seed core hidden below the moon's crust. And as the first wave of enemy ships descended, firing dark lances of energy toward the moon, the Judicator fired back, its rail cannons lighting up the sky with blue-white bolts that moved faster than thought, ripping through the enemy line and sending burning wreckage falling in every direction. And for a moment, it felt like victory until the second wave came. Larger, stronger, with strange, spider-like craft that latched onto the Judicator's hull and began drilling through, trying to bypass the outer defenses, and Alina could feel them like insects on skin, their presence triggering the warship's internal defense drones. And from within the halls of the ship, sleek silver machines activated, flying through corridors like hawks, intercepting the invaders before they could breach deeper, and every moment became a blur of action. The ship and its commander moving as one, targeting, striking, shielding, adapting, while above, the sky turned darker with each passing second, filled with smoke, fire, and flashes of deadly light, and all around Theros, its ground cracked and split as the seed core pulsed stronger now, its energy calling out to the ancient systems hidden deep below the surface, systems even the Judicator had almost forgotten. And suddenly, Alina saw something unexpected on her displacement echo. Another buried structure, rising from the sands, several kilometers to the east, shaped like a tower, glowing with the same energy as the seed core, and the ship's voice said, "Auxiliary Archive, awakened." And Alina understood then that the moon itself was not just a hiding place, but a vault world, a place built to protect the last knowledge of a lost age. And now that protection had failed because the Vor had found it and would not stop. Not until all memory was wiped away. And so she gave the order, activate planetary defenses, and, with a roar that shook the sky, energy pillars erupted from the surface, forming a web of light around the moon, catching several warships in mid-flight and tearing them apart in bursts of fire. But even that was not enough to stop the siege, because from beyond the dark horizon, a new ship arrived, massive and terrible, shaped like a spear of darkness, larger than any of the others. Its arrival, bending space itself, and the Judicator identified it with a single word, Harvester, and Alina felt dread like a cold wind in her bones, because the Harvester was not a weapon, but a mind. A Vor command ship designed to erase entire civilizations by draining memory and rewriting truth. And if it reached the seed core, everything the galaxy had forgotten, every secret, every song, every hope would be lost forever. And Alina knew then what she had to do, even if it broke her, and she stood again, placing her hand against the ship's core, whispering, "Link deeper, show me what you can't." And the Judicator hesitated for the first time, warning that the connection would be dangerous, but she gave no command to stop. And in the next instant, her mind was flung into a storm of images, fleets rising and falling, planets burning, ancient races joining in one final alliance, a desperate stand against a war that had ended here, with the Judicator crashing on Theros, not in defeat, but in sacrifice, sealing the seed core beneath the moon's crust, hoping that one day someone would come who could awaken it again. And now, Alina was that someone, not by fate, but by blood, the last thread of a forgotten lineage. A child of the Prime Commander who had given his life so this knowledge could endure. And when she opened her eyes, her voice was no longer just her own, it carried the echo of those who had come before. And she shouted, "Focus all weapons on the harvester by me time." And the Judicator roared in response, firing every cannon, every lance, every shard of energy it had stored across millennia, striking the harvester again and again, even as it drew closer, shielded by layers of dark matter that shimmered and absorbed much of the assault, but slowed just enough, and Alina raced to the vault chamber. The seed core pulsed like a living star, and she placed both hands upon it, letting it read her thoughts, her fears, her hope, and it responded, unlocking a final protocol called the Beacon. And across the galaxy, hidden relay stations dead for ages suddenly flared to life, transmitting a single message: the seed lives. The Judicator stands. The Vor return. And though Alina did not know who would answer, she knew someone would, because not all memory had been lost. Okay? And as the harvester reached striking distance, preparing its final assault, the Judicator used every last ounce of its power to raise its core shield, protecting the seed core and its commander in a final stand, refusing to fall again. And on the moon of Theros, beneath the sky filled with fire and shadow, a war forgotten by time began again, not with surrender, but with defiance. Alina stood still in the vault chamber, hands pressed to the glowing surface of the seed core, heart pounding as light from the massive crystals swirled around her like a living storm. And deep within her mind, the voices of the past whispered, countless memories reaching out, trying to speak through her, trying to guide her. And for a moment, she lost her breath, caught between now and then, present and past, as the legacy of a forgotten civilization poured into her thoughts, not just data or language, but emotion, purpose, hope, and a fierce understanding of what the seed core really was. Not a weapon, not a relic, but a key to everything humanity once was, and everything it had been meant to become before the Vor War began. And as that truth lit up inside her, the ground shook again, harder this time as the harvester's ship above unleashed a second wave of energy, hammering against the Judicator's failing shields, trying to break through and reach the vault, while the warship fought back with all it had left, blasting enemy ships into shards, its outer hull now scarred and broken in places, smoke and fire pouring from damaged towers. And yet it stood, refusing to collapse, just as its last human commander had once refused to fall. And now Alina felt the weight of that heritage more clearly than ever, not because of bloodline, but because of choice. And the seed core responded to her choice by unlocking something ancient and interface, older than the ship, older than the moon itself, glowing lines of light shaped like DNA and star maps rising around her in the air. And suddenly, the vault trembled again, but not from attack, from activation. Hidden machinery far below the crust of Theros began to turn and rise, awakening after so many thousands of years. And the Judicator spoke into her mind once more, voice quieter now, strained. The inheritance is ready, but I cannot hold the harvester much longer. And Alina whispered back, then let it come. Because now she knew what the seed could do, and why the Vor had feared it so deeply. For within its core was not just memory, but power data that could restore what had been lost, not just to humanity, but to every species that had once stood beside them in the Great Alliance. A code that could rewrite what the Vor had erased, revive the minds and cultures they had stolen. And Alina knew that the moment she released it, the Vor would descend with all their force to stop her, because, to them, the seed core was death not in the way of destruction, but in the way of truth. Truth they could not consume, could not change. And so, They feared it more than any weapon, and above, the harvester grew closer, breaking through the last ring of planetary defenses, its hull glowing with gathered energy, preparing its final strike. And Elena ran back through the halls of the Judicator, corridors shaking around her as explosions rang out above, passing shattered drone parts and fallen Vor constructs, until she reached the command chamber once more, where red warning lights flickered across every screen. And as she sat again in the command seat, the ship said softly, "You are the last." And with a breath, she replied, "Then I'll be enough." And she issued the command the Judicator had waited lifetimes to hear: release the inheritance. And the ship obeyed, lowering its deepest defenses, letting the seed core's energy rise, not as a weapon, but as a beacon, a signal of memory and meaning. A living wave of light that spread out from the moon in all directions, touching nearby ships, enemy and ally alike, slipping past armor and code into the minds of everyone who could receive it. And at first, the warships hesitated, their movements breaking rhythm as confusion spread among them and within the harvester. Something strange began to happen. Systems flickered, its weapons stalled, its energy wavered, because the light of the seed carried not commands, but clarity. Stories and truths the Vor had tried to erase, now re-entering their stolen minds, breaking their hold from within, and some of them began to drift, lost in memory, while others turned on each other in panic. And still, Alina held the signal steady, guiding it outward, letting it stretch farther and farther, until somewhere far across the stars, others answered the fleet, responding to the ancient call. Their own ships, old and half forgotten, but still flying, still waiting. And the Judicator's sensors picked them up, human vessels, and alien ones too, bearing markings no one had seen in centuries, all moving toward Theros, drawn by the beacon, ready to join the fight. And even as her ship's shields finally failed, and the harvester's final weapon began to charge, Cana did not look away, did not flinch, because now she saw the truth of humanity's inheritance, not strength or pride, but memory and the courage to carry it forward. And as the harvester unleashed its final strike, a blast of dark energy wide enough to shatter the moon, something else moved the ship that had been hiding behind Theros, long silent, now reactivated by the seed's call, one of the Judicator's sister ships, rising from beneath the planet's crust like a phoenix from ash. And it fired a beam of brilliant white light that intercepted the harvester's blast, canceling it out with a scream of power that shook space itself. And as the two energies collided, a shockwave rolled across the moon, scattering enemy ships, disabling many, and the harvester itself shuddered as cracks formed along its hull. And Alina watched as its lights began to dim, its systems overloading, until it finally broke apart, silent and defeated, falling into the dark below. And the Judicator soul, now flickering and damaged, spoke its last words to her. "It is done," and Alina whispered, "Not yet," because she knew this was only the beginning. The seed had called the survivors home, and now it was up to her to lead them, to teach them what had been forgotten, to rebuild what had been lost. And as the sky cleared and the stars returned, Alina stood at the center of the command deck, the last of the old and the first of the new, and in her hands, the inheritance of a broken galaxy waiting to be made whole again. The stars above Theros no longer flickered with the fire of war, but peace had not come lamely silence, deep in waiting, as if the galaxy itself held its breath. And in the center of it all stood Alina, now more than an explorer, more than the voice of the seed, but a leader of something reborn. And as the first Allied ships reached orbit, old human vessels marked with ancient flags and strange angular alien ships with glowing blue hulls, she felt the weight of every decision still ahead, pressing heavier on her shoulders. 'Cause, though the Vor harvester had fallen, The threat was not over, not by far, and the seed core pulsed beneath the moon like a heartbeat, sending signals still, summoning others from across the void, calling out to those lost in the dark, and not all who came would be friendly, because the seed had not only reawakened memory, it had disturbed the balance. The Vor had built over centuries of quiet control, and now, from the far edges of known space, they stirred again, angry and afraid, ready to destroy what they had once failed to erase. And Alina knew this was coming, had seen glimpses of it in the visions from the seed, waves of Vor fleets gathering in deep space, thousands of ships, dark and silent, waiting for a single order to move. And with the Judicator soul now barely holding together, its systems damaged, and shields offline, she needed a plan fast, and so she turned to the new arrivals, the captains of the surviving ships, many of whom had once thought they were alone, scattered remnants of the old alliance, keeping two shadows and ruins. And she brought them down to Theros, into the chamber where the seed core floated, and there she told them everything about the war, the fall, the truth of the Vor, and the power hidden in the seed, not as a weapon, but as a signal, a spark to reignite what had been lost. And many of them listened in silence, unsure, broken by years of hiding, but one by one they began to nod, to remember, to hope again. And Alina gave them a choice: leave or stay and help build a defense, because the Vor would come again soon, stronger, faster, ready to destroy the seed once and for all. And not a single captain turned away, and so it began, the first stand, not on a battlefield of fire and explosions, but in plans drawn on dusty tables, in energy cores being repaired, in ships once thought useless brought back to life with parts and skill and memory. And across the surface of Theros, towers rose again, shields were layered, cannons placed, and communication arrays built to spread the signal farther, reaching old allies in hidden corners of the galaxy. And even on the moon itself, strange things began to happen, as old Tharn cities under the sand stirred to life, welcoming back their people with open doors and glowing light, as if they had been waiting to. And Alina walked among them every day, helping repair cables, carrying parts, learning names, not just issuing orders, but earning trust, until the people stopped calling her commander and began calling her First Light. And still the stars stayed quiet until one morning, a new satellite was deployed above the moon. It caught something movement, faint and distant, but unmistakable, like a ripple in water just before the wave hits. And the engineers scrambled to check, and what they saw froze the room. Warships, hundreds, maybe more, shaped like dark knives, drifting together, not attacking yet, just watching. And for the next day, they stayed that way, circling the edge of the system, testing responses, looking for weaknesses. And Alina stood on the surface beneath the sky, staring up at nothing, because the Vor never sent messages, never spoke, only struck. And when they came, they would come with silence and death. And as night fell on the fifth day, the sky lit up with fire again, not from above, but from within, as dozens of Vor dropships screamed down through the atmosphere, targeting not the seed core directly, but the cities and towers built to protect it. And the first stand began, not as a single battle, but as a series of strikes and defenses. And everywhere on the moon, lights flashed and alarms rang, and Alina was in the command chamber when the first tower fell, struck by an enemy ship that had dropped straight through a hidden gap in the orbital grid. And she gave the order, counterstrike, now, and allied ships above moved fast, intercepting, destroying many of the enemy vessels, but not all. And some Vor constructs reached the ground, swarming like spiders, fast and sharp, their weapons cutting through steel and armor. And on the front lines, human and Tharn soldiers fought side by side, pushing back, not with fear, but fury, because they knew what was at stake. And each meter of ground they lost, they fought to take back. And Alina moved through it all, never staying in one place too long, always where she was needed. 1 hour in the vault, boosting signal strength. The next, beside the medics, helping carry the wounded. The next, giving orders from a forward post under fire. And every time she spoke, people listened. Not because she shouted, but because she believed, and her belief gave others strength. And then came the second wave, larger, faster, and worse. It targeted the orbital grid directly, sending cloaked mines that slipped past sensors, detonating near key relay points, blinding sections of the defense. And Alina made a choice. Fast and hard, she sent the Judicator Soul, damaged though it was, back into orbit on a final mission. Its core nearly spent, but still able to control the grid from within. And the ship's voice, now quieter and flickering, said, "It has been an honor." And with one last burst of energy, it rose into the sky, wrapped in fire, and began guiding the defense manually, sacrificing its last systems to close the gaps and block the next wave. And as it did, its final message played across every ship, every screen, a single sentence that echoed through every soldier's heart: "The light endures." And that was when the Vor made their final push, dropping not ships this time, but a construct massive, walking, shaped like a twisted tower, unfolding on the surface like a beast, heading straight for the seed core. Hey, nothing seemed to stop it. Not missiles, not lasers, not even coordinated fire from 3 ships overhead. Hey, and Alina knew this was the test, the moment the Vor meant to prove they could still erase the past. And so she went herself, climbing into a small command drone, flying straight toward the thing. And when she reached it, dodging blasts and falling debris, she activated the last unknown part of the seed's systems, something even she hadn't been sure would work. The Guardian Protocol, a code buried deep in the seed that reached out into the very material of the moon itself, awakening not machines, but memory formed into light. And from the ground rose pillars of blue, and from them stepped shapes, figures made of light and metal. Ancient guardians of the core, forgotten even by the Judicator. And they moved with one goal: protect the seed. And together with Alina, they turned toward the Vor Tower beast and charged. And in the battle that followed, nothing was left untouched. Dust became fire. Sky turned red, and when it was over, the Vor construct lay broken, its parts fading into mist. And the seed core glowed bright and calm, untouched, and around it stood soldiers, survivors, guardians, and in the center of them all, Alina, bruised, tired, but unbroken. And the first stand was won not in glory, but in unity, and far beyond. The message continued to spread. Humanity had returned, and this time it would not fall.